The Sociology of Refractive Surgery. Hi, I'm Guy Kazarian from Scottsdale, Arizona, which is in the southwestern portion of the United States. It is a land of cactus and golf courses. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Sociology has many definitions. If we look at how the American Sociological Association views it, we can see sociology as a broad study of society, or a social science involving the study of the social lives of people, groups, and societies. A little bit more specifically, it could be about the behavior of social beings, or how people aggregate into groups and go throughout their lives. From the perspective in this program, we'll be considering sociology as an overarching unification of all studies of humankind, including history, psychology, and economics. All of these are affected by refractive surgery. Some of you may be thinking, why are we considering sociology in a program on refractive surgery? Well, by the end of this program, that will become clear, as our work affects people in profound ways throughout every waking minute of their daily lives. In this course, we will consider the sociology of refractive surgery itself, the sociology of refractive errors, and the sociology of refractive solutions. The development, acceptance, adoption, economic considerations, social and psychological considerations, comorbidities, delivery models, concepts of ethics and human rights, and our professional opportunities that exist in the context of refractive surgery. From a sociological perspective, the history of vision correction is fascinating. In the BC era, there really was no vision correction. There are some anecdotal reports of Seneca and others holding a glass globe of water as a magnifier to read. It wasn't until the ruins of Nineveh around the year 1000 that we find evidence of actual lenses being used, and wearable lenses weren't invented until the 13th century. Da Vinci illustrated the concept of contact lenses, but they didn't appear until 1887, and at that time they were made of glass and covered the entire eye. Concave and convex lenses first appear in the 17th century. Bifocal lenses, devised by Benjamin Franklin, the American historical figure, was announced in 1784. Sir George Airy in England first reported cylindrical lenses in England in 1825. Contact lenses really didn't come along until the 70s. There were certain plastic contacts that were developed slightly before that, but commercially used lenses weren't about until the early 70s. Gas permeable lenses a short time later, 1978. One-day disposable lenses in 1996, and orthokeratology was approved by the FDA in 2002. The green circle points to the era of surgical intervention of refractive errors. Again, putting another timeline against it, the first reports of surgical interventions were by Lons in the Netherlands in 1896, performing an astigmatic keratotomy. Very similar to what we do even today with a limbo-relaxing incision. Keratomelusis was reported in 1964 by Barraquet. We'll talk about some of the technologies in a moment. Radiokeratotomy first appeared by Sato in Japan and then Fedorov from the 1970s. Sato did it from the internal cornea, caused a lot of corneal decompensation, and was discredited. Fedorov realized it could be done from the external cornea and made somewhat of a success of it until the lasers came along in the 1980s and 90s. The excimer lasers, of course, came out of the silicone computer chip industry at IBM, and Steve Trokel and others brought that to ophthalmology in the early 80s. The first corneal excimer laser procedure was done in 1987. PRK and LASIK were developed in the late 80s and early 90s. The LASIK approvals by the FDA were done in the 90s, late 90s actually for LASIK, 1999. Femtosecond lasers appeared in 2001 for corneal applications. Then, of course, this has been followed by a rapid technological evolution with flying spot lasers, trackers, wavefront guided and topography guided ablation, and other innovations. When you consider the long millennia in which humankind lived with blur if they were born with ametropia, the rapid progression of interventions in the last 30 years is absolutely astounding. And that's really what this course is about, is to look at that development and consider where it will go next. Today, vision correction has truly come of age. Both corneal and lens-based procedures that can be used for basically all ages that have refractive errors, with at least 8 different categories of procedures, advanced safe technologies and accurate and safe procedures really have become accepted as being normal and mainstream. We have amazing diagnostic imaging. You've studied this in other parts of this course. Topography, OCT, epithelial imaging, the optical quality of the materials and lenses and the procedures that we deliver is absolutely amazing. And the tear film and lids and glands understanding has really helped us with the ocular service management. When you consider that topography was only brought into commercial application in the early 90s, that OCT was something that was never heard of in ophthalmology until the last 15 years, and that excimer lasers and femtosecond lasers have all come about in the last 25 to 30 years. It's quite astounding to look at the pace of development and really the careful, responsible way that our technologies have been developed. We now have these beautiful technologies with accurate and safe procedures. They are incrementally better every year, but the accuracy and safety of our devices today is perfectly acceptable for widespread use, which is why it has received such widespread acceptance around the world. We can consider vision correction as a function of age or as a function of refractive error. This graph, this diagram shows the nearsighted procedures across the bottom, the hyperopic or farsighted procedures across the top, with a mix of presbyopia in between. And it shows a timeline of aging that indicates which procedures are generally used at different ages, with some latitude for individual exceptions. We generally don't operate on children. We generally will treat them with glasses, sometimes contact lenses, and more today, myopia control and corneal strengthening procedures, as we'll be talking about in a few minutes. Young adults are perfect candidates to have their distance vision corrected. This has occupational, functional, safety, lifestyle, and economic benefits. And for them, correcting them early in their adulthood, once their eyes are stable, gives them the longest benefit from vision correction. Here we have procedures on the cornea, like LASIK, PRK, and SMILE, and others to be developed soon. And then, of course, for higher corrections, generally speaking, we can use intraocular phakic IOLs. In middle age, again, we can sometimes find applications for LASIK, PRK, and SMILE, but more and more commonly, refractive lens exchange, sometimes inlays or onlays, plus or minus LASIK may also be used. And interestingly, presbyopic drops are now coming out, which are basically miotics, maybe with a little pilocarpine or some kind of a cycloacting effect that cause a little bit of a accommodative boost. And these drops will be very interesting to see how they cause perceptions in the public to change about the possibility of treating presbyopia, which many people still do not know about. And of course, in seniors, we have cataract refractive surgery. Cataract refractive surgery really, I think, is going to become the norm very quickly, not only because the technologies are becoming better, but because people are living longer. And so to have glasses-free vision through the end of life is a blessing and something that many people will seek out. Vision correction is often thought of as being a cosmetic procedure, sometimes for the wealthy, when in fact, vision correction is appropriate at all stages of life, as we just talked about. In the young person, myopia control, but also recognition, as we'll talk about in a moment, of the psychological impact of myopia and refractive errors on adolescents is something we should be paying attention to. In much of the world, there are no glasses available to school children, and as a result, their learning is impaired, their occupational opportunities are impaired, and it's not a cosmetic consideration at all. It's something that's highly functional. Safety considerations of people being caught without their glasses, particularly higher myopes, are very concerning. First responders and others, of course, can't work without having their eyes corrected if they wear glasses or contact lenses. It puts them at risk. Of course, there's always the recreational aspect of it, and more we're becoming attuned to the dangers of contact lenses and the concerns that exist around infections and other problems that are caused by improper use, particularly of contact lenses. Modern vision correction surgery has penetrated several fields very well, particularly in people in high performance careers. First responders, military pilots, Army infantry, models, TV personalities, athletes, truck drivers, and particularly refractive surgeons who know the most about refractive surgery. The economics for the individual are overwhelmingly positive. We use our vision every waking minute. Having good vision affects occupational fitness, convenience, lifestyle, and actual economics because it's cheaper over time to have your vision corrected than to continually buy glasses and contact lenses. The safety profile of refractive surgery is much better than with contact lenses, so people who would previously turn to contact lenses to get out of glasses now have safer alternatives in surgery. This has been shown looking at the risk of microbial keratitis in a metadata analysis by Aaron Waite and his group, and found that it was a 10 times better safety profile with LASIK than with contact lenses. Refractive surgeons have refractive surgery at a very high rate, at least 4 times the general population, and over 90% of refractive surgeons have performed refractive surgery on their immediate family members. A metadata analysis of the literature in refractive surgery showed that LASIK is the most studied procedure in the history of medicine. Over 600,000 cases have been reported in the literature, with satisfaction rates ranging between 95 and 99%. A prospective study comparing LASIK satisfaction with contact lenses showed that LASIK was far more satisfactory to the patients, particularly if they came from wearing contact lenses. And of course, the FDA study, which was called the PROWL study, or patient-reported outcomes with LASIK, looked at patient satisfaction scores in great detail across several laser platforms and found uniform, wide acceptance with refractive surgery. The sociology of the world is fascinating. It wasn't until 1804 that there were 1 billion people on Earth, and today there are over 7 billion people alive. 107 billion people have been born throughout the history of humanity, which means that 6.5% of the people ever born are alive today. Unfortunately, the development of refractive surgeons and ophthalmologists has not kept up. Our burden is growing and growing. Our delivery models must change to meet the demands of all of humanity, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Today's vision industry is quite large. On a global scale, it's over $1 billion per year in US dollars. The US vision market is about $41 billion, with a little over 5% of that, maybe 6%, being in LASIK. Presbyopia market for vision correction is nascent, but is expanding rapidly with the different technologies that are coming along. And of course, the cataract refractive market is also expanding with premium IOLs and different lens designs to allow for great vision without glasses after cataract surgery. 75% of adults in the US use some form of vision correction, and everyone becomes presbyopic. 10% of contact lens wearers stop wearing contact lenses every year. Now, these are people who chose to get out of their glasses and wear contact lenses, which is not convenient or easy to do. These were motivated people. When they come out of those contact lenses, most of them would prefer to have their eyes fixed than to go back to glasses. With proper education, that can become the case. Looking at the developing world, if we consider the total number of people on Earth, and that 6 billion people live in the developing world, and if we look at the age group of just young adults of 21 to 45 or 18 to 45 years old, there's 1.4 billion people. 720 million of these people have significant refractive errors, and 75% of these people live without refraction correction. It's because they can't afford it, they can't access it, it's not there. Maybe there are ethical and sociological barriers to it, as we'll talk about. But at the end of the day, we have about 540 million people who are functionally impaired with significant refractive errors that are going without correction. There's a good argument, having tried to do many programs over the years to bring glasses to people around the world, that simple vision correction surgery in a 10-minute procedure might be a better solution for these people. Looking at the US market in a little more detail, you can see that each segment of vision correction is growing over time. Spectacle lenses, contact lenses, eyewear and frames, all of them are growing in every category with time. But at the same time, while we would expect to see vision correction undergoing the same continuous growth, we had a peak around 2001, shortly after the FDA approvals of LASIK. Then we had a drop-off. It came back a bit up through about 2008. When the economic downturn came, it dropped off again. It has come up gradually since then. In fact, the last few years it's been growing between 8 and 10%, but we still haven't recovered to the peak that we had around 2000, and I don't believe that we've even approached the levels that we will have in the next coming years. Let's look at all the different ways that people can correct their vision and evaluate the pros and cons of each one. We'll do a quick literature search, we'll do a quick search of some of the different results and studies that have been done. The purpose here is not to have you memorize all of these different studies, but to create an awareness for you of what's in the literature, how people were looking at it, and really the depth and the thoughtfulness that's gone into some of the studies around vision correction. Awareness of contact lens dangers is growing. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, in the United States, has published many articles on this and even has an annual weekly campaign about contact lens danger awareness. The devastating effects of these corneal ulcers, which can affect vision and sight and sometimes be lifelong disabilities for people, are known to all of us. We've all treated them. The contact lens awareness trial programs that the CDC runs have been quite effective, but we still have over 10,000 eyes a year just in the United States that have sight-threatening corneal infections from contact lenses every year. We often ignored the devastating psychological effects of myopia on adolescents, probably because we couldn't do anything about it. But as we've come up with different solutions ranging from contacts and orthokeratology and earlier surgery in young adults, people have started to pay attention. Myopia control, of course, has also influenced this because as myopia control with atropine and other agents comes along, it's going to drive a whole new industry. This study was a very nice study that showed the effects of myopia on young adolescents included lower self-esteem, they were more lonely, they experienced more criticism, they had higher weight, more fear, and they were subjected to more very stressful events or situations as they grew up. Another quality of life study looked at what happened when adolescents were put into contact lenses. The COMET study, called the Correction of Myopia Evaluation Trial, was published in 2013 and showed that using contact lenses gave adolescents better self-esteem. This is interesting because it points out that the problem with self-esteem and all the things on the previous slide were not necessarily due to the myopia, but to the method of correction and the stigma and social awareness that can come from wearing glasses. The literature is not unanimous on refractive errors causing negative psychological effects, however. In the first study, shown here, there was a minimal impact on quality of life with myopia in adolescents. In the second study, it showed that myopic children had slightly less physical activity, but the question was that a cause or an effect of their refractive error? We'll talk more about the relationship between physical activity and refractive errors in a moment. To close this section on the sociology of refractive surgery, consider that for the last 20-something years, the World Health Organization and other organizations like the International Association for the Prevention of Blindness have earnestly worked to bring glasses to the developing world. Despite this, 2/3 of the people in the developing world go without refractive correction. It's good progress in coordination, but the problem remains unsolved. The logistics, breakage, cost, and acceptance have been constant challenges. In much of the world, people went from having no telephones to jumping to cell phones and skipping the wired technology of corded phones. I believe that refractive surgery has a similar path to offer for many people who go from no glasses or contact lenses to no need for glasses or contact lenses because they have their eyes fixed. Let's talk about how that will come to be. Having considered refractive surgery per se, let's talk about refractive errors, their causes, patterns, and prevalence, comorbidities, what happens when they're untreated, and some of the psychological, social, and developmental, and importantly, economic impacts of refractive errors. The prevalence of myopia on a global scale is increasing at an alarming rate. The Brian Holden Institute has published on this over the years, as has the World Health Organization and other groups who are committed to treating refractive errors. The take-home message here is that the incidence of myopia by the year 2050 will impact more than 50% of the human population. There's been a lot of work done on why the incidence of myopia is increasing. We'll talk about some of those things. They relate to indoor activity, lack of sunlight, maybe lack of exercise, increased use of near screens like mobile phones and cell phones, a lot of studying, more intense competition at school. All kinds of things may play a role, and plus genetics. But the reality is that the bottom line, we have a greatly increasing incidence of myopia, and it's going to fall on us to both slow down that progression and to treat it when it occurs. High myopia is particularly concerning, as we'll talk about in a moment. The comorbidities are very serious, and the impact on quality of life is very significant. Myopia has been largely untreated in the developing world, and this is rather concerning to everyone, particularly those of us who work in global health. This is not a trivial issue, because if people aren't able to see, they're eliminated and excluded from many aspects of work and from education. If we want to try to make the world sustainable, cause people to have an ability to participate, prevent the economic disparities that lead to wars and other problems, vision is one of the root causes of poverty and is one of the things that we must address and take seriously. This graph shows some of the trends that were revealed in the other graph in the general form on the previous slide, but shows how all ranges of myopia are increasing, and that the number of non-myopes is decreasing even today. The International Association for the Prevention of Blindness does wonderful work. I encourage you to check out their website. There's many atlases and facts and figures available there. They have been surveying country by country to assess the amount of untreated refractive errors that exist around the world. Certainly, sub-Saharan Africa has the biggest prevalence of untreated refractive errors, and yet, surprisingly, South America and some other countries that are associated with Western world have similar problems in untreated myopia. This is not just a poverty issue. There are sociological issues behind it. We'll talk about those. People who feel that having glasses is a social stigma. It still exists in many societies. So it's worth for us to understand these things as ophthalmologists. The data are incomplete. You'll hear me say that a couple of times during this talk. We need more data, but I do applaud the people who are doing valiant work in trying to assess and survey these statistics for us on a global scale. The literature is expanding rapidly. Very exciting field to be involved in. Again, it comes down to economics. Untreated refractive errors have a huge economic impact. As you can see here, it's almost $250 billion per year. Here is the study behind that statistic. It was published in Ophthalmology in 2018. This article not only looked at the burden of lost productivity caused by untreated myopia, it also asked the question, how much would it cost to provide glasses to correct it? The answer was only $20 billion. A 10-to-1 return on financial investment is very attractive and speaks well for our future and our opportunity to address refractive errors. Treating myopia improves the quality of light. This has been formally studied in several different places by several different groups. Daily efficiency, family affairs, school performance, extracurricular activities, school attendance. All of these references that you see here are available on the web, and I encourage you to look at them. The data are fascinating, and they create new urgency for our work. The prevalence of myopia varies significantly by region and ethnicity. Both genetic and environmental factors are at play. The data are incomplete, but many national surveys are going on all around the world. The findings are quite diverse. In Ethiopia, for example, is the lowest number I could find. The prevalence is as low as 20% with myopia. In Korea, it's as high as 83% in very well done studies. There's a genetic factor and an environmental factor, as I mentioned, and some people have looked at this over time as well and found that the prevalence of myopia is increasing with use of cell phones and indoor activity, as mentioned previously. The Beaver Dam Eye Study is a longitudinal study that looks at many eye diseases, including myopia. And it began in the U.S. in 1987. The town of Wisconsin called Beaver Dam is the origin of the name of the study. They studied all the citizens of that town between the ages of 43 and 84 years old, and the study continues today. The baseline exams and follow-up through 20 and now 30 years is coming up. They published over 360 publications from that data set, and there's other parallel studies going on in the Blue Mountain region of the U.S., in Beijing, in Australia, and other places. What the Beaver Dam Eye Study has identified with a fair amount of certainty is that urbanization, education, a lack of outdoor activity, intensity and duration of reading, age through adolescence, and genetics, of course, play significant roles in positively correlating with an incidence of myopia. The British did a study. The Twins Early Development Study was published in 2018, and it showed that there are several factors associated with the incidence of myopia. Maternal education, higher educated, more myopia. Fertility treatment seemed to be associated, but that might be confounding based on education and socioeconomic status. Summer births, interestingly, seem to have a higher correlation with myopia. And interestingly, the hours spent playing computer games did not seem to affect myopia, and that was somewhat confounding with the other studies that have been done. The odds ratio was only 1.03. The Korean National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey looked for risk factors for high myopes in Koreans. As mentioned earlier, the overall incidence of myopia in Korea is 83%. High myopia occurred in 7% and is associated with younger age, development of myopia, onset of myopia, female sex, educational level, hypertension, and some other systemic conditions. Interestingly, this study found that longer sunlight exposure was protective. Is this because the sunlight is protective or that gets them away from their books? It's hard to say, but clearly getting these young people outside and using their distance vision is helpful. The Beijing myopia progression study looked at generational differences in refractive error. This was very interesting because they were trying to tease out the question, is it all genetics? And how much of it is from the environment? They looked at refractive errors at the age of 11 years, compared it to their parents' refractive errors at the age of 11 years. And from that, they found an increased prevalence of myopia in the current generation, such that the predicted average amount of myopia is at least 2 diopters higher than it was in their parents. The remarkable single generation myopic shift indicates there are likely effects of environmental factors on myopia development in urban Chinese children. Looking at the question of what influences the development of myopia a little bit further, the Beijing childhood eye study, different from the study on the previous slide from Beijing, looked at factors associated with myopia. On the left side, we see causative factors: higher age, female gender, school type, parental myopia, higher socioeconomic background, dim reading illumination, and longer daily studying duration. On the right side, we see some of the impact of this. They had less rest during study, shorter duration of watching TV or computer because they were reading, higher self-reported protein intake, which is interesting, higher feeling well about life and status, and feeling tired and dizzy. So there's a constellation of findings there that suggests in these very well done studies that the competitive nature of society causing increased studying, decreased time outside, and working and reading a lot might be contributing to the development of myopia. This has led to some interesting social change where they're putting glass ceilings in libraries to bring in some more natural light. They're getting the kids outside. Here's an example of that. In the Beijing Childhood Eye Study, they looked at a one-year follow-up and took some of these children and had them spend more time outdoors and studied them against their cohort. And they found that an increase in myopia occurred in the people who didn't get the outdoor activity, and the outdoor activity decreased the development of myopia. The economics of myopia and of treating myopia in children are significant. The mean annual cost of myopia glasses, for example, in Singapore school children was $221, Singapore, or $148 US per subject. And myopia is associated with a significant financial burden. This definitely plays a role around the world. The cost of glasses, the cost of treating myopia is high, and it speaks for public health measures to support children to have glasses during their school years. Going back to China, in comparing rural and urban children, it was found that rural children had less access to glasses and less use of glasses, which has significant public health implications. Spectacle affordability in some societies limits their use and effectiveness. In India, the prevalence of myopia in this one study was 13%, with only 320 children, or 24% of those, wearing appropriate spectacles. So I hope by this point the concept that economics and vision are inextricably linked has become quite clear. The global pyramid of wealth applies to all aspects of life, but it's not equally divided. There's far more people in the lower parts of the socioeconomic spectrum than at the top. One can hope that over time, the shape of this pyramid will reverse and there'll be fewer at the bottom and more at the top. It's going to be some time before we get there. The challenge to us then is to come up with delivery systems and models to be able to provide vision correction for people at all ends of the economic spectrum, and to do so in an affordable and sustainable way. There's been some interesting questions asking if myopia is associated with intelligence. Do people who wear glasses have a higher IQ? When regarded separately, cognitive performance does seem to be linked to myopia. However, it's probably more due to the duration of education, which may directly relate to the risk factors for myopia, and it's probably not that intelligence causes myopia, but that maybe those who are motivated intellectually read more and develop more myopia. The findings from some of these studies that we've been talking about are so compelling that they've become accepted as fact, and I think that's accurate. Myopia certainly does increase the risk of ophthalmic comorbidities. They're listed here: myopic maculopathy, retinal detachment, posterior subcapsular cataract, glaucoma. These are familiar to all of us. The incidence on the right side with high myopia is dramatically higher. You can see 127 times higher for myopic maculopathy than in the emmetrope. The implication here is that after we've corrected someone's vision, they must continue to have exams because their eyes are still physiologically myopic, even though their vision has been corrected. Moving on now to solutions and looking for the response that we should take to the sociology of refractive errors as ophthalmologists. An obvious place to start would be if we can control the development of myopia through activity interventions, increased sunlight exposure, perhaps atropine and other things to slow the progression or delay the progression of myopia in children. There's several studies that support the need for intervention, particularly on having children spend more time outdoors. They are listed here, and I recommend them to you. Low-dose atropine control is effective. The titration of doses is being evaluated still. This will be going for some time, I would predict. It doesn't prevent myopia, but it definitely slows the progression. Several different studies have been done. Some very nice longitudinal studies have been done and are ongoing. The drops are typically given 2 or 3 times a week. They're low dose. They have reduced the dose more and more to try to decrease the mydriasis and the impact on accommodation and functional accommodation in children. The protocols are being perfected, but I anticipate that this will play a significant part of the future treatment of myopia. I believe that those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. We know more about this than anyone in the world. As ophthalmologists, it is our duty to do something about it. Refractive surgery is no longer a developing new novel idea. It is a main part of ophthalmology, to the point, as you'll see in a moment, where I believe it will become its own specialty very soon. So let's ask the question, what would it take? Suppose we wanted to give refractive surgery to particularly young adults, as they enter adulthood and clear up their distance vision? What would it take? Well, let's first ask, how many are there? If we look at the segment of the population, which is 18 to 45, you can see that it is growing as a percentage of the overall pie, even as the pie is growing in the size of the human population. By the year 2030, there will be 3.6 billion people in that demographic from 18 to 45 years old. So, with that in mind, how many people need to be treated? Well, at equilibrium, if we were to keep up with the development of new myopia by simply treating the new cases every year, and hopefully eventually over time decreasing the backlog of people who are untreated in that demographic age group, we'd have to do 133 million eyes per year. In the whole history of LASIK, we've only done about 40 million eyes. So this is 3 or 4 times more than we've done in the whole history of LASIK being done every single year with some kind of refractive procedure. To explain how we arrived at the number 133 million people, we first defined the concept of a treatable refractive error as being somewhere between +3 and -7 diopters of myopia, with 3 diopters or less of astigmatism. On a global scale, the prevalence of that is approximately 50% in the young adult population by the year 2030. That means that as 133 million people reach that age group every year, and a 50% incidence of treatable refractive errors, comes out to half that many people, or 133 million eyes per year. And of course, the 133 million eyes only includes the new entrants. There's a tremendous amount of backlog or people that haven't been treated in that range as well. So really the number is much higher. If we were to treat the entire backlog out by the year 2030, we would be talking about 3.6 billion eyes being treated between now and then. I don't think we're going to get there, but let's look at what it might take to move toward that goal. Today, we have about 11,000 refractive centers worldwide. Centers that, let's say, have eczema lasers and some kind of keratome, whether it's a femtosecond laser or not. If a center does 6 patients per hour, which is very doable, for 8 hours per day, and does this 5 days a week, 50 weeks per year, then that one center could feasibly, theoretically treat 24,000 eyes in 1 year. Now that's not looking at all of the intake and post-op. That's simply as the rate limiting step of the center doing surgery. It could theoretically treat 24,000 eyes per year in one center efficiently used at this capacity. So if we multiply that times 5,500 laser centers, we come up with 133 million eyes per year. This theoretically could satisfy the demand for refractive surgery entries into that 18 to 25-year-old age group. Will this ever happen? Well, actually, I believe it will, because the economics are amazing. If someone has refractive surgery and doesn't need to buy glasses and contact lenses year after year throughout their adulthood, and they have it, say, when they're 21 years old, they save approximately $18,000 before they reach presbyopia. Now, the money comes all at once when you buy refractive surgery. We need to make it more affordable with, again, better delivery models and better financial models. The decreased risk adds to the value of that because contact lenses have infections and serious complications at least 10 times as often as LASIK. And of course, the impact on lifestyle, convenience, and occupational fitness adds to the economics even more. In the developing world, as we mentioned, 2/3 to 3/4 of the people who have refractive errors go without refractive correction, again by the International Association for the Prevention of Blindness. Their increased productivity yields massive returns on investment, and the economic upside is in the trillions over 20 years. In my experience, economics tends to result in behavioral change, and I believe that these economics will cause more and more people to engage in refractive correction and refractive surgery over time. Here's some cost comparison in looking at what it costs to have LASIK and green and adding up all the costs of other things that might be needed over time for wearing glasses or contact lenses. And as you can see, the cost for having your eyes fixed is significantly favorable to any of the other solutions. What would we have to do to make it happen? Well, we have to change our delivery models. We have to think about telemedicine, for example, in different ways that we can see more patients and use different personnel and allocate personnel differently. Maybe surgeons should be doing more surgery and training non-surgeons to do the intake and output in a very, very well done, well-trained way. We need better business models. We won't ever get to the point of doing as many eyes as we need to do to eliminate refractive errors at $2,000 an eye, for example, some of the common prices in the US today. We're going to have to figure out ways to really increase the volume so that we can decrease the price and still create a sustainable economic model. The technology has to continue to improve. Our devices are still, while they're wonderful, still not well wired together. They're getting better. The digital platforms have to improve. And again, telemedicine is going to play a significant role. Most importantly, we have to gain political and financial support. As vision correction surgeons, it's no longer enough to be good at what you do. Other people have to know how good we are. We have to tell our story. We must become involved in the public discourse. We must educate people, both politically and in our patients and in our communities. People must understand the importance of vision correction to get behind us and support our work. When one considers the severe economic impact, the occupational fitness impact, the ability to go to school and get a job that having untreated myopia causes, it's not a far question to ask, should vision correction and should vision be considered a human right? I go to Africa with my work with the Himalayan Cataract Project quite often. Here I am with a group of school children. These are 8 and 10-year-old children. And it was remarkable to me that not one pair of glasses existed in this entire school. It's in a rather poor part of Africa. I was in the Limpopo region of South Africa. But surely we can do better. Surely we can give these children a chance to see. There's no way that none of them were myopic. The question of whether vision should be considered a human right has been well considered. In Article 1 of the Declaration of Human Rights, it says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Well, if I'm effectively taxed and have to pay for glasses in order to be able to see, I think that is a fundamental inequality based on genetics and circumstance of birth. Article 25, everyone has a right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family. Well, if I can't see and go to school, if I can't see to work, I don't have an opportunity to provide for my family or myself. Article 26, everyone has a right to education. Well, if I can't see, I can't go to school. I can't see at school. And this happens throughout the world and developing world, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, where children who can't see well simply drop out of school. I believe the answer is yes. Vision should be considered a human right. It's fundamental to our existence, particularly now that we have a way to provide it. Under the question of what would it take? Well, it begins with physician leadership. The Refractive Surgery Alliance Society is a collaborative group of refractive surgeons with the goal of bringing the benefits of refractive surgery to more people through collaboration. The Refractive Surgery Alliance, which, by way of disclosure, I founded some years ago, has grown to over 350 members today in 2019. It has rates for students that are very affordable and residents that are very affordable. And our goal is to increase awareness and participation in refractive surgery so that we can indeed bring the benefits of refractive surgery to more people by working together. The Physician CEO program educates doctors in the concepts of business and really was the reason why I can give this talk today, because it gives one a very analytical and economic perspective on our work. Using round numbers, there's somewhere plus of 7 billion people in the world, somewhere around 30,000 ophthalmologists, and somewhere around 5,000 refractive surgeons. You might be thinking, how can 5,000 people solve the vision problems of 7 billion people? Again, coming back to the delivery model conversation earlier, it's going to take some significant system change for us to get there. The graph is not broken, by the way. When you have one bar that says 7 billion people, the 30,000 and 5,000 bars don't even show up. A little daunting, I realize, but I believe we can do this. Collaboration will be critical, and there's many wonderful groups working together now, and we'll be working together even more as we make a group effort to solve the vision problems of the world, particularly refractive errors. We already have some refractive surgery centers in Africa that are treating vision problems with refractive surgery as primary care, and the same in South America, bringing it to the poor. Our goal is to bring good vision to everyone by working together. There's an old saying in business, if you want to grow, narrow your focus. A dedicated focus is going to be essential for us to achieve our goal of eliminating refractive errors on a global scale. Today, refractive surgery is a subset of ophthalmology, and somewhat of a misalignment for so much of ophthalmology, since much of ophthalmology is disease-based, and we are mostly about performance. The required state, I believe, is for refractive surgery to separate as its own specialty. Just as retina has separated, oculoplastics and glaucoma have become their own specialty, I think all of us are going to wind up being our own specialties over time. We'll still be ophthalmologists, of course. We'll start out by being ophthalmologists. We must understand the entire eye. But as a refractive surgeon, our focus is on performance, not disease, and this calls for a different approach to everything we do. A separate specialty is necessary. I believe it's important to step back and look at the impact of our work from time to time, and that's what we've tried to do in this lecture. Sociology really is central to our work as refractive surgeons and as ophthalmologists. Our work impacts people's lives every waking minute of every day. We live in a digital age where vision is essential to normal function, and refractive errors are increasing in prevalence and will affect over 50% of the population within 30 years. Refractive surgery will become the default mode for vision correction, and the only question in my mind is when. The reason? The economics are overwhelmingly positive for refractive surgery for both patients and for society. We are the agents of change, and we must provide physician leadership to maintain quality and make sure this is done in a responsible and sustainable way. Today we've talked about refractive surgery, its development, its acceptance and adoption, the results, the impact, and economic considerations. We've gone into the development of refractive errors, the causes, patterns, and prevalence, comorbidities, the prevalence of untreated refractive errors, and the impact of that on social, psychological, developmental, and economics. And we've looked at how we might solve the problem. What would it take? With myopia control, improved delivery models, considering vision as a human right, and our professional opportunities with leadership, system design, and collaboration. There are many resources available on the internet and elsewhere. If you want to learn more about this topic, I encourage you to do so. A couple of starting points: looking at the Global Myopia Center.org, the Brian Holden Institute, the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, IAPB.org, and many others. The literature is huge and mushrooming. Many people are focusing on this, and as we do, hopefully we will come together and work together to solve this problem. Thank you for your attention today.